welcome to this week's edition of the Middle East and Africa Forum for Sustainability Leaders, a podcast series that is dedicated to those who actually have the responsibility of sustainability in their job title, in their day job, not a tangential, not a marginal add-on to their activities, but actually is the core of what they do. They are the people who are emerging in new verticals within new organizational charts that are tasked with the responsibility of anchoring in sustainability strategies, getting all of the pieces of their companies, their institutions to move forward with a ESG program and adopting and embedding all of those regulations that are coming at us from all sides. And on that grounds, it's an absolute pleasure to welcome today Mr. Shargil Bashir, Executive Vice President and Chief Sustainability Officer of First Abu Dhabi Bank. Welcome, Shargil.
Thank you so much, Sean. Thank you very much for having me.
I suppose let's start at the beginning, really, because I'm quite interested to know, when did FAB first bring this position into life? Quite often, the sustainability brief has been tagged on to those who were maybe tasked with CSR or part of the HR activity, or in some cases, even the CFO office has held some of this responsibility. How did FAB first come to this idea of the Chief Sustainability Officer, and where does it sit in your structure?
Yeah, so this basically started. So I joined First Abu Dhabi Bank in late 2020. I've been in the financial industry for a long time, over 20 years. I've been with banking. I'm originally from Denmark and joined FAB almost 2.5 years ago, where I was brought in to lead our corporate governance department at the time and to ensure that how the bank is going to ensure to have some of the best-in-class corporate governance structure. We at that time, shortly after I joined the bank, there was a change in leadership, and our current CEO joined the bank at the time. And when the overall strategic direction of the organization was being set, it was a very important point for the leadership to have the ESG aspect included in that. And as I have been working on sustainability in some of my previous roles, and I had connection to sustainability and sustainability strategy, I was asked to look into a holistic ESG strategy for the organization, which I started working on with multiple stakeholders internally, but also externally, to gather the relevant inputs and so on. So in summer 2021, I had the opportunity to present our ESG strategy to our board, who signed off on the strategy and approved that strategy. And as part of that, I was then asked to also lead and implement the strategy in the organization, and then move fully into the role of Chief Sustainability Officer. So it actually
was it dictated or incentivized, in terms of your own pitch to the senior leadership team of the bank? Was it because of the value and opportunities on the bottom line that this green economy presents a huge new economic opportunity for the bank, or was it because of the regulatory obligations as a publicly listed company and other large public companies and ministries across Abu Dhabi and the rest of the region have now got new regulatory standards to comply with? Which one of those two were the driving North Star?
It was definitely the first one. Definitely the first one. So, and I think it's important to recognize the work that First Abu Dhabi Bank and the legacy banks had been doing. The previous banks, FGB and National Bank of Abu Dhabi, who merged to FAB. The first sustainability report by National Bank of Abu Dhabi was done back in 2010. So it wasn't a new topic in the organization. So ESG and sustainability was a topic that was known in the organization. And since 2010, a lot of small steps were taken. FAB issued the first green bond as the first bank in the MENA region back in 2017. We made commitment to do sustainable financing. We developed the first sustainable financing framework for banks in the region as well in late 2019. So a lot of first steps were taken by FAB. So it wasn't a new topic in the organization. But what we saw was that as part of that maturing and taking those steps was, how can we ensure a holistic ESG strategy, and where are the opportunities? So why should this be important? So what we started to look into was that our clients were moving more and more towards sustainability. We were seeing net zero economy and low carbon future playing a more important role. We were seeing that different trends moving more and more towards sustainability. We started to see research that clients are now willing to pay a higher price for sustainability products. When we were trying to hire the best talents in the market, they were asking us about sustainability. When we looked into investors, shareholders, we know that sustainability was an important topic for them to invest in. When we looked into the regulators as well, we were starting to see more in the European and the Western world, more focus around sustainability and regulation around sustainability. So all key stakeholders had started to move that direction. So for us being the biggest bank in the country, it was important for us to support our clients, support UAE's ambition around sustainability and ESG. And that's why that we started to make this shift as well, which was pioneering at the time.
What do you think about in terms of the ESG piece, that is the sort of principal pillars of a sustainability strategy, and building those? You said you had principally came on board in the governance side of the bank. Where is the balance of those three things, three pillars, if you like, do you think, in the context of a sustainability strategy within any institution, putting aside the sort of the opportunity for the green bonds and so forth, but in terms of the institution or a company adopting a sustainability strategy that is credible from the point of view of a ESG score, like a credit rating, an ESG rating? Where are those three in the context, let's say, of Abu Dhabi, from your observation? Is governance the one that needs the most work? Is it the environment? Is it the social? Where do you think those three are balanced in the context of corporate UAE?
I think, first of all, it's a little bit like choosing between your children, right? Which one do you prefer? And you can't do that. So all three of them are critical to ensure a long-term sustainable corporate behavior. I think that's important to recognize. But between those three, I think there are different maturity levels. And these maturity level depends on which region you operate in, but it also depends on which sector you operate in. So as an example, coming in the banking industry, governance has been a critical topic for many, many years. We have seen previously in Europe, we have seen some gaps around compliance and governance, which have had significant impact. So I will say from a banking industry perspective, governance has for a long, long time been a key pillar. And I would say that probably a topic that a lot of the banks are
key pillar of weakness or strength. I mean,
it was weakness, which was then, regulated and has become a strength.
So I think would that be reflected in the, let's say, the credit ratings that institutions would have enjoyed? That would always be a bit of an Achilles heel a little bit in the rating.
Absolutely, I think when you speak with the rating agencies, they will always start by looking at, do you have a two-tier management system, right? You have a board of directors that is very clear, defined responsibilities. You have a executive leadership that has a very clear, defined responsibilities. What kind of shareholders do you have? How do you engage with your shareholders and so on? So there's been very clear, defined setups, and this has probably come on the back of the financial crisis in the around 2009, and after that we've seen a lot of regulation on this topic, especially for the banking sector. I would say there are other corporate sectors that are still maturing on this topic as well, but for the banking sector, this has been very mature. I think environment and the E aspect is been a topic that the financial sector is still maturing on. So that was an area we needed to focus more on as a banking sector. But it's a topic where other industries have had a head start or has been more engaged on that topic to start working from that perspective. And then you have an S part, which I believe is relevant for all companies. And it's often right now, we have a lot of discussion around climate change. Climate change is extremely important. We know COP28 is coming up later this year, so the focus is even more enhanced in this region. But luckily, we have some frameworks. We have a direction we need to go on. I believe that the S part is typically a more difficult aspect to work with
And
globally.
when you say the S, obviously you're talking the social. Why do you identify the climate challenge within that pillar?
I don't, sorry, maybe I wasn't clear. So I see the climate change being in the environment part very
Right,
clearly. So,
right.
but my point is more that on the climate part, we have some frameworks. We have a
Yes,
net zero.
yes,
How can
yes.
you achieve that? What are the steps, right?
The
We can
UAE
measure,
has
yes,
identified 2050 as a
it's
net zero target for the country, and every company and institution has their own pathway within that.
absolutely. And we have some measures we can work with, right? How do you reduce your greenhouse gas emissions? And we have some way to calculate these and so on. So we have kind of a framework that you can follow. The S part becomes a little bit more difficult because there's a very big regional differences around the S aspect. About how do you gender balance, as an example, diversity and inclusiveness is very different in Germany versus in Oman, as an example, or UAE versus US can be very different. So those aspects is much more difficult to measure or work with one global framework and direction and say this is where we need to be by that time. So from organizations also need to create a culture and needs to say how can we align from an S perspective and what are the topics that we need to work on is extremely important. So S part is the part which I believe is more challenging to work with than the E and G because there exist some clear regulations and guidelines and aspects, even though that part of S has something similar, but it's still taking time.
What would be the given the S piece, the cultural and other aspects that come into that the decade before sustainability came forward to be a sort of a requirement, an opportunity, there was the decade of Islamic finance, let's say in the noughties, and with that came a lot of different principles, different regulatory requirements. Was that anyway a platform, a framework that can serve the adoption of sustainability strategies, of the rules and regulations that come with that, as that also came with Islamic finance, or do you see them as completely separate?
I think I will say that there definitely been some principles that you can work with. CSR is something, a topic that we have been working for from a long time. Donation, community engagement is a topic that has been very strongly embedded in the culture of the region, especially embedded in UAE's identity. So we've seen a lot of those principles coming, which are also coming from the Islamic financing principles, by the way, as well. So we have those principles. And again, I see that on some of these points, the region is extremely strong on the S part, while other region does not have the same starting point because these kind of topics are not embedded. When I look at the level of volunteering we see in this country and in the region, it is extremely high. When we look at the community engagement level, it's extremely high. When we look at the donation levels we see from organizations, but also individuals are very high. So we have a lot of the topics on the S side that we are very strong on. And then there are other aspects that we need to develop further. And that is, very different from region to region globally.
In terms of the coming back to the specifics of First Abu Dhabi Bank, your arrival obviously in 2020 to come into the bank, and as you identified to the sort of the governance, and then build out the ESG, and then arriving at the position of Chief Sustainability Officer through that period, and putting forward your vision to the board and to the bank's leadership for adoption. I'm wondering, from that point of view, that's quite of a top-down approach. And where is the bottom-up approach? We see quite often in the West and in Europe and America, perhaps to a certain extent as well, where the sort of obligation for compliance with sustainability standards has been kind of demanded by the ground, by the shareholders, by the street, by activists, and so forth. And then the boards and the the leadership of corporates and institutions are reacting to that. Here it seems to be a little bit the opposite. What's your views on that, and what kind of challenge or different sort of opportunity or challenges that present to adoption?
I think having been worked in the European market for past decades, for me, the tone from the top is extremely important, and I see that being similar in Europe to being here. The tone from the top, being the board, being the leadership, is extremely important to make that a key priority. But that's the part they can do. But then you need to have this bottom up. You need to create the culture. With every strategy, and whether it's sustainability or corporate, you need to embed that strategy within the organization. You need to make sure that your organization understands why is this important. Why is it that we want to focus on this? Otherwise, you're not going to get them to follow on your vision and execute that vision. So that has been extremely important. So we've spent a lot of time on raising awareness in the organization around sustainability. That has been one of our key priorities, to raise awareness. So last year, we introduced mandatory ESG training for every single employee. It was a mandatory training because it was like.
What did that look like exactly?
So that looked like that. So we have done different training. So there was a basic training that every single employee needed to take, which was very about what is ESG, what does it mean, how
what's
do you
in the
work
box?
with this? Exactly, what's in the box? What does it stand for? Why is it important for us? And what does it mean for me as an individual? What does it mean for the organization as well? So very basic understanding of ESG. And after that, we have tried to build employee journeys of their awareness and training. So depending on your role in the organization, which division of the organization you sits in, we have tried to establish specific learning needs and develop training for those. So as an example, later this year, we are introducing a carbon literacy program for all employees, which they will need to take before COP28. Because that we have a commitment to become a net zero bank by 2050, for each employee to understand how can I impact and how can I work with carbon reduction, decarbonization, but also.
And again, that's compulsory, the carbon literacy program.
Correct.
And do they get a certification or any kind of?
Yes, they get a certification. So this is split over 3 modules, and once they're done, they get a certification of that. And it has been catered specifically for our needs. So we work with our relevant suppliers to make it relevant specifically for this market and for us as a bank as well. So for us, it has been a key priority to raise awareness of all our employees and make sure that they get the relevant training. We've also had some specific training on ESG risks. So what are the risk side of it and what is the opportunity side of it? How do you make an ESG risk assessment that has been very relevant for our wholesale banking employees? And then we adjusted that training for our employees who work with the SMEs, as an example. So we looked into that part as well. We have had some training specifically focusing around the D&I aspect of things as well. So we on diversity and inclusiveness.
Right.
So we have tried to split those different trainings as well. And once you have raised the awareness, it comes down to that, how can you then mobilize that awareness into some concrete actions on some concrete priorities, making some KPIs that are relevant for the different areas they need to work with. And we have also established on a voluntary basis a sustainability forum for FAB, where we try to, on top of everything else we do, that people that have an advanced interest in sustainability, that how can we get them involved on different volunteering programs? How can we share some additional interest or additional e-learning programs, webinars they can participate in to raise their awareness even further? To say that here we have some ambassadors of sustainability. So how can we get them to focus additionally on that? And so this was a forum we established earlier this year in Q1, which is on top of what you do from your work. If you have an additional interest, you can join this forum. We aim to have roughly 1 activity a month. We share with them different research information that comes out, can be shared with these people because they have an advanced interest in sustainability.
And when you take all of these component parts, the learnings, the the compulsory seminars and the awareness, as you say, it allows you to mobilize awareness into action. What does that action look like? What is there an example that you would be targeting from the action point of view?
So under the ESG strategy, when we set that out, it was very important for us to make this tangible. It was important for us to make it tangible both for our employees so they could, follow our traction and understand it, but also for our leadership in the organization. For all the ESG, we have set out some KPIs and what success looks like. And that success is defined both on short, medium, and long term. So for all these under the ESG, we try to set targets both on short term, which is typically 12 months for the yearly target. We've set some targets for 2025. And then but we set some long-term targets, which are typically towards 2030 or 2050, which are more long-term radical changes that are required. I can give you a couple.
Is there anywhere on that journey where you would engage with a solicited ESG score?
Yes, we have. So we have, as an example, some ratings as part of that as well. Ratings on ourselves, but also how we rate our clients on an ESG perspective as well. So we have that as well. So I can give you a couple of examples. Under the E part, we have set some targets that we want to become net zero from our own operations by 2030, which is our scope 1 and 2. And then we have set a target that we want to be overall net zero from our scope 1, 2, and 3 by 2050. So we have started to now define how does that roadmap look like? What are the steps we need to take every year in order to achieve these targets? So we start dividing this into yearly targets. And we have set a target that we want to finance sustainable financing for $75 billion by 2030. And that number gets split up to a yearly level. How are we progressing on that? Last year, we did $9.1 billion of sustainable financing. This year, so far in 2023, we have done more than $6 billion.
And when you say sustainable financing, do you mean, are you saying projects that might be a solar farm or?
Exactly. You're spot on. So this goes, again, sustainable financing is again on E, S, and S part, right? So right. E as a green projects can be solar projects specifically, windmills, it could be other environment-related projects. It could also be social-related projects, which could be healthcare, as an example, that could be financed. So other social-related projects. For that, we have facilitated more than 15 billion last year since we introduced our strategy till now, of the target of 75 billion of 2030. So that's a target progressing very well from that perspective as well.
When you take the obviously a lot of what you started talking about there in terms of external engagement, a lot of the previous insights you shared were about the mechanics within the company, within the bank, as to what you're doing to advance your sustainability commitment. But when you turn externally, and of course, First Abu Dhabi Bank is a bank with lots of clients, and you make your return by investing or facilitating credit to a lot of corporates. What are their obligations, and what standards is the bank setting? Increasingly, we're aware that with credit ratings, obviously that guides what you price your lending to your clients with, but also now with sustainability ratings, are your vast number of corporate clients in the country getting up to speed here? Could they be left behind? Could they be faced with paying higher borrowing costs if they don't advance their sustainability strategy? Where does that sort of rubber meet the road, so to speak?
Yeah, I think so. What we have done, we started by engaging with our largest clients on sustainability topics, on the environment specifically, and what does net zero mean. So as we have committed to net zero by 2050, we started our pathway to say, okay, from our portfolio, how will we get to net zero? Where are the sectors where we are providing financing, which has the highest emissions, as an example? Right? So we started to engage with clients within these sectors specifically to say, how does your journey look like to net zero? So last year, we engaged with hundreds of our clients to understand where are they on their journey? Have they started their journey? Have they not started? What is the maturity level within the organization on this topic? What are the steps they're going to take in the future? Have they any plans in place? Is that a topic they're discussing? If they have set some targets, how are they progressing on these targets? How have they set these targets? So we made a questionnaire that we shared with our clients around sustainability to get their feedback to understand their maturity level. And then we engage with them to say that, how can we support them? Exactly as you say, nobody gets left behind. Because UAE has made a very clear commitment to become net zero by 2050, which means that a lot of our clients, if not all of them, will need to start their journey to get to net zero. How can we, as their strategic partner, their financial partner, start supporting them on these changes? This might be that some clients need to change their current high emitting different solutions they might have, products they might have, to a low carbon solutions. How can we support them on these things? How can we support it from a financing perspective? How can we support from an advisory perspective on these topics? So we engage on these discussions. Some companies will be very mature. Some will
like
have
your own
sustainability
staff,
teams.
where it's compulsory
Exactly.
to get up to speed with your ESG literacy and so forth. Are you setting any similar requirements to your clients, ultimately those in which you are lending money to? Do they have to meet certain standards going forward?
Not at this point, Sean. I think it's still very important to realize that we're very early on this journey, and and the transition is going to take time, and we need to make sure. And again, I think this is the same discussion we had in energy, right? Oil and gas is not something you can turn on and off. Transition needs to be done in a secure and a responsible way.
That's all. I mean, I hear what you're saying, but ultimately, the credit rating agencies are not waiting. I mean, ultimately, there's already a requirement. You cannot advance at your own speed, but ultimately there will be a cost for that, because you're like other aspects of a credit rating. Your rating will be lower if you're slower.
Absolutely. I think that is true to some point, but I also think that it's important to remember that if you don't support your clients on making this transition and just putting a higher cost, you might not helping them. It's important for us to have the right long-term relationship with our clients, which does not mean that just because they're a little bit slower, that we're not going to support them in this change. We need to support them in this change and this transition that is needed, because that is extremely important. We also got to recognize that we do have sectors that have not found the technical solutions to decarbonize at this point. We can take as an example aviation sector. And we all know that
as they say, hard to abate sectors.
Exactly. It's a very important sector. We know people travel a lot. We can see that people actually travel more now than they did 10 years ago. But we haven't found the perfect solution yet. Sustainable aviation fuel is 3 to 5 times more expensive than the jet fuel that is used right now. So are you and I willing to pay 3 to 5 times the ticket prices? The
Feels
market
like we are at the moment,
exactly.
having just booked my summer holidays.
So there are sectors where we still need to wait for those technical solutions to come through. Just like the solar. If you remember 20 years ago, solar panels was not as cheap as they are today, right? So some of these things will need to take time, and that's why we need to have the right transition plans in place, instead of just saying it's one size fits all and it fits all times.
And I sort of finish up with the reverse of that question, Shargil, which is in this window of time with the COP28 coming very firmly in our vision in a few months' time in the region, in this country, there is a great focus at the moment, and consequently a great acceleration by many corporates and institutions to try and get up to speed with some of these requirements, some of these pillars, if we like, ESG and so forth. What's the risk in the opposite of rushing? And what would your advice be as companies and institutions rush to get more aligned as the limelight is thrown onto all of these issues?
I think, first of all, Sean, I would like to highlight that 2 years ago, when I got into this role till now, I have seen extreme maturity in companies on focusing on sustainability. 2 years ago, I reached out to some of the biggest clients and some of the biggest companies in the region and in the country. Very few had sustainability teams. Now, I think all the large companies, I will have a counterpart I can speak with around the topic of sustainability. So I think that's a very important first step and very important development that we have seen. I think that it's very important that you just don't go ahead and rush into something, set a strategy and believe that is this. The strategy needs to live. We got to remember that when we speak about climate change specifically, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon, right? We need to change over time. We need to make the right, responsible and sustainable transition, which is again not just turning on and off on lights, right? It's gonna take time. We need the maturity. An important topic that I always like to highlight is human capital. Right now, it's very important to upskill people to focus on sustainability within these multiple sectors that we should decarbonize. We are seeing more education pieces around sustainability coming through. We need much more of that. We need the collaboration between the private, public sector, academia to come together to enhance those competency and capabilities that are required in the future. So it's not a very quick sprint. It's about the marathon. It's about putting that long-term strategy, splitting it up, taking the step at a time, making sure you're moving. Try to move as fast as possible, but do it in a responsible and in sustainable way.
Well, we're going to have to wrap it up there. We could talk for a very long time. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with Shargil Bashir, the Executive Vice President and Chief Sustainability Officer at First Abu Dhabi Bank, our special guest on this week's podcast for the Middle East and Africa Forum for Sustainability Leaders. And clearly, he is establishing himself as one of those leading in the country. Thank you so much, Shargil.
Thank you so much for having me, Sean. Appreciate it.